Hello and welcome to the Spike podcast. I'm Fraser Myers. With me in the studio, as ever, it's delighted to have editor Tom Slater.
Hello, Fraser.
And joining us down the line, we've got Candice Holdsworth.
Hello.
Loads to talk about today. We'll be discussing the ongoing fallout from the local elections and the humiliation of Keir Starmer. We'll be talking about the attempts to suppress the AfD in Germany and the fight back to the Supreme Court ruling on trans. But before we get on to all that, Tom, do you want to let the people know about a very exciting event we've got coming up?
No, absolutely. So we've got a really exciting in-person event that we're holding at the end of the month on the 28th of May at 7 p.m. in Westminster. We're doing a book launch, an event with Andrew Doyle, one of our old Spiked favourites, who's got a brilliant new book out called The End of Woke. So we'll be doing a little Q&A with Andrew on stage, as well as plenty of time for questions from the audience. It's in Westminster. It's at 7 p.m, as I say. There might even be a few drinks laid on too. This event is exclusive for Spike supporters, members of our online donor community. So if you are one of those people who give us money regularly, you can go onto the online hub now to claim your ticket to buy it for £20. And if you're not already a supporter, surely this is the best time to sign up. You'll get access to these tickets, but also you can enjoy all kinds of other exclusive perks like access to the comment section and reading the site ad-free as well. So if you want to find out more, just go to the website and log into the Supporters Hub if you're already a supporter. If not, go to spiked-online.com/supporters to sign up, log in and get your ticket. We look forward to seeing you there.
See you there. So we're 1 week on from the local elections. The sort of fallout has been pretty extraordinary. It's now clear just how sort of dominant Reform were in those results. You know, going above 30% across the country. Labour losing often many sort of old heartlands by double-digit figures. Tories being more or less wiped out. Tom, what have been your big takeaways over the past week?
Well, I think it's just the scale of the victory, really. It couldn't really have gone any better for Reform. When the dust finally settled, you saw, north of 650 council seats taking control of 10 councils, that by-election victory, the 2 mayoralties that they've now won, topping another national poll. This is really, really significant. I mean, we spoke kind of in the immediate aftermath of the results last week and about how this is the most serious potential challenge to the two-party duopoly that has ruled British politics for 100 years. That's only been confirmed as all of the results have now officially come through. And it's fascinating to see the way in which they're winning. So obviously, first past the post has always been a hindrance to parties like Reform and its predecessors because of the fact that it tends to historically kind of shore up the two main parties to kind of protect them from challenges because of the way in which the system works, because of the way in which it, again, kind of prizes bigger parties with more concentrated votes, bigger ground game, etc. That's kind of flipping now. If anything, in this situation, Reform's leads were being boosted, their gains were being almost exaggerated by first past the post, which is kind of it's an unfair system until it's not. Yeah. And then it can be very helpful to a party, particularly when they're starting to rise up the level of vote share that we've been seeing and developing a very solid ground game. So this is a really significant moment. And then also, if you look at kind of where they were winning and amongst who they were winning, I mean, in heavily working class areas, Reform are picking up close to 40% of the votes. It's pretty clear that they are reassembling or in the process of reassembling the coalition that delivered first Brexit and then the 2019 Boris Johnson Get Brexit Done majority. That fault line in British politics has reasserted itself. I mean, it's never really gone away.
Yeah.
But kind of the way in which kind of beyond the narrower question, shall we say, about the European Union and our relationship with it, that now reflects a really clear schism in society, in large part along class lines, also in large part along cultural lines, and that is what is delivering this Reform insurgency, which just seems to be going from strength to strength at this point.
And Candice, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about, some of the Labour policies that people are reacting against, winter fuel allowance, certain welfare cuts, but this is deeper than that, isn't it? This is not just a protest vote against Keir Starmer and his unpopular government. There's a bigger, more exciting political insurgency happening.
Agreed. I think that is such a good point because I think people said a similar thing about Brexit, that it was a cry of pain. And then you don't really have to deal with it and you can sort of infantilize it and you can't really see it for the significance that it is, or that it's even something quite optimistic. And I think it's absolutely true that Brexit is still these local council elections are going along a similar pattern as the Brexit vote, but deeper, because actually Labour lost in places that they didn't even lose in 2019. So, I mean, this is reaching so much deeper. And so I think that this is actually something quite optimistic. I think people are really starting to want something different. They're not just saying, oh, I'm a bit irritated with Keir Starmer, and maybe if I show him I'm angry, he'll come back to us again. No, I think people are actually done with the Labour Party in many, many places. They are done. I think the Conservatives are maybe further on the path of decline, but this is showing just how much even Labour might be collapsing as well.
And Tom, it does feel like, of course, people's animosity to the Labour Party extends beyond Keir Starmer, but he does feel uniquely unsuited to lead in our times as a sort of the last gasp of technocracy, as much as he might try and pose as being anti-globalisation or waving the flag or whatever it might be.
No, absolutely. He's kind of gone from being a figure that struggled to make an impression on the British public, such as the sort of numbing quality that he has to him, to becoming very quickly the embodiment of that old order that they so wanted to rebel against in 2016. And afterwards, the way in which he's just sort of doubled down on the failed technocratic consensus, where obviously originally in relation to Brexit, wanting to overturn that, now kind of begrudgingly having to accept it while trying to do kind of backroom deals with the European Union at the same time as that, but also on greenism, on all of these different issues which ordinary people are beginning to see are diametrically opposed to their interests, what the elite wants to do. He's doubling down on all of that. And what I find interesting is even when he tries to suggest that he gets it, to make interventions, as he has done periodically since he came into government, talking about the open borders experiment of the Tory government and how that has failed, memos that he circulates to Labour Party politicians being leaked in which he talks about the horror of, that ordinary people feel for being dismissed as racist and so on. Like, even when he tries to sound these notes, it's just not cutting through. Yeah. Because it feels insincere, because it feels at best he's just been relayed this information from Morgan McSweeney or a focus group or someone a bit more sensible in Blue Labour or whatever, and he's just parroting it. When push comes to shove, it's clear where his politics is. And that's precisely that politics which people reject, not just because they disagree with it on particular policy areas, although that's certainly true, but because it's a way of doing politics which we rejected wholesale in 2016, which is it should be done over the heads of ordinary people. It should be done via quangos and experts. It's something that holds ordinary people so much in contempt that not only will it happily say one thing and do another, it will actually, try and take politics entirely out of the democratic arena. He's just very naturally become the embodiment of all of that, to an extent that even I've been quite surprised. Like, people really dislike him. Yeah. People either are kind of indifferent to him or dislike him, and that's not a great position to be in, particularly when you were supposedly quite at the helm of quite a large majority, which has just proven itself to be a complete sandcastle already.
Definitely. And Candice, I mean, there was a bit of a mask-off moment in Labour. This was, I think, the proof that the party holds the public in disdain, and particularly the working class in disdain, when Lucy Powell made her comments on grooming gangs.
Documentary on Channel 4 about rape gangs over this.
We want to blow that little trumpet now, do we? Yeah, okay.
There is a real issue.
Let's get that dog whistle out, shall we? Yeah.
What did you make of that whole quite grim episode?
I think that's a comfort zone for many people in Labour, and it's maybe the conversation that people were having 15 years ago, where you could just shut it down and call the other person racist. I mean, look what happened with Sarah Champion, a Labour MP who tried to speak out about this issue. She was just crushed just by that, by being called racist. But I think we're in a very different moment now, and I think MPs like Lucy Powell fail to grasp the moment we're in, that people are actually very, very angry about this, and that they want a reckoning with it. I mean, the documentary they referred to, the Channel 4 documentary Groomed, when you watch it and you hear the victims speak, and they will say things like, yes, maybe they were afraid of being called racist as well, but also I think no one really cared about us. And I think that's also the thing as well. I think that so many Labour MPs, maybe they were afraid of being called racist, but I think also there was just total contempt and disregard because they didn't want to deal with this issue. And now it's bubbled up and it's come back to bite them big time, and I'm sure they're in complete denial about it.
Tom?
I think Lucy Powell is a repeat offender where this sort of thing is concerned. I mean, there was a set to she had with Andrew Neil on what was then the Daily Politics, just in the wake of the Manchester Arena bomb. She's a Manchester MP, and he just asked a straight question, how bad is the problem of Islamist extremism in Manchester?
How serious is the problem of Islamist radicalisation in Manchester?
Well, I'm not sure that this is the right moment to totally go into that, because I don't even want to ascribe what has happened to the Islam faith.
I didn't say Islam, I said Islamist, which of course is different. And we learned that there are areas regarded as hotbeds of Islamic State in the Manchester area. Were you aware of that? Is that common knowledge in the city?
It's I think sometimes these things are given labels.
She basically tells him off. She says we shouldn't be pointing the fingers at any particular community, which is a repulsive response to one of the most horrendous Islamist attacks we've ever seen, but also, frankly, dim. She obviously didn't even know what the word Islamist meant.
Yeah.
She obviously didn't even realise that he wasn't pointing the finger at ordinary British Muslims in Manchester or anywhere else. He was talking about the most deadly terror threat that we face then, now, and for many years. There's that, herself, many members of the Labour Party, sort of on a CV level, seem very impressive, but just aside from holding all the prejudices and the towards ordinary people, the willful blindness towards crimes like the grooming gangs, are also just incredibly thick, I think. And that was another example of that.
Well, I mean, there's also an irony in the fact that they're the ones that assume, the white working class are prejudiced, or anyone who's interested in this crime is prejudiced. But they too are worried. They seem to think that if they talk about, these mainly Pakistani Muslim grooming gangs, that Muslim voters will be offended by this. That they are not also appalled by the mass rape of, thousands of girls, that as if they're somehow pro-grooming gang or sensitive to that charge. What do they think they're trying to say? They've got themselves in this bizarre position where they don't want to talk about it because they think it'll inflame the white working class, and they don't want to talk about it because they sort of prejudicially assume that Muslim voters can't handle it.
No, I think that's all it comes down to, is those two twin prejudices. You put them together and you get this scandal in so many different respects. Yeah.
Before we move on, we should talk about two trade deals sort of in the works this week. Not fully signed, the US one, but first we heard about the India trade deal. This was meant to be Keir Starmer's big moment. This should have been the big post-Brexit trade deal, one of the most significant economies in the world, probably the biggest, most liberal arrangement that India has ever signed with anyone. And yet it did get derailed quite quickly by this accusation that British workers would be undercut. Tom, I don't think there's much truth to this, but even the fact they didn't anticipate this seems a bit...
No, certainly there was an element of overclaiming with that, I suppose, and a natural willingness of the opposition parties to punch a bruise when all was presented to them. Kind of got the hairs got set running by that briefing from the Indian government's side, suggesting that this was a great advantage for Indian workers and so on. Basically does seem to boil down to an arrangement for posted workers in the UK from Indian companies for 3 years not to pay national insurance, because they'll already be paying a roughly equivalent level of national insurance back home. As many people have pointed out, there are various countries which are engaged in this particular arrangement. There is still a lot of question marks as to what impact this deal might long-term have on immigration and the makeup of it. Even though this deal is not about immigration per se, those are arguments that people can have. But it was just so interesting how quickly that narrative took hold and how difficult it was for the government to rebut it, because of the fact that people don't trust this government, particularly where immigration is concerned. And I think this was another example of that, even if people were, maybe getting a little bit ahead of themselves in some of the comments that were being made about it. And
definitely, and Candice, just before we were talking, there's a press conference with Trump and Starmer on the other side of the Atlantic. Do you think maybe this actually is a bit of a vindication of Starmer not being too whiny about Trump? Britain has been the first country to get a trade deal. I think a lot of us, when we found out that David Lammy was going to be the foreign secretary, a lot of us expected perhaps something a bit more of a childish approach to foreign trade. David Lammy famously said he would tie himself to the Downing Street railings should Donald Trump ever come on a state visit, words he's since eaten. Do you think there's possibly something to be said about the less than hysterical approach the Labour government's taken?
Yes, I mean, if they could see themselves now compared to where they were 8 years ago, would they believe us? I don't know if they believe it. I think they'd entered into some alternate universe. But yes, I think the way that they've approached it, they've been shrewd, pragmatic. I think the moment absolutely calls for that. What they'll probably never admit, though, is that the Brexit vote gave us this ability to do this, that Britain can just act in its own interest. It's free to strike trade deals with anywhere in the world. And I think so many people say Brexit is has failed, but it hasn't failed. It gave us that fundamental freedom, which now they've been able to use and put it to good use. So yes, I will give credit where it's due. You know, they haven't behaved hysterically, they've been mature, but I wish that they would also say that it was Brexit that enabled them to do that.
Didn't David Lammy also say at one point that if you sign a Trump trade deal, he's going to buy the NHS or whatever?
Yes.
There's always a tweet.
Yeah.
So, well, we look on this with interest to see whether or not that all those scare stories have come true now.
And on another topical note, he was offended by reporters talking about the black smoke the last time there was a papal conclave. He said it was people being crass to refer to the race of the Pope there.
That's what I mean. Low quality people. This is what I'm talking about.
This episode of the Spiked podcast is sponsored by Shopify. Now, there was a time just over 25 years ago when Spiked was just an idea in the heads of a few determined journalists. Without a lot of hard graft and determination to get things off the ground, it could easily have just remained an idle thought rather than the political force we are today. Let's face it, starting your own business, whether it's a cafe, a clothes brand, or a political magazine like Spiked, can be stressful, even just to think about. There's so much to set up, to manage and juggle before you've even made that first sale. But that's where Shopify comes in. Shopify is there to help you every step of the way on your business journey, whether you're working out of your parents' garage or if you're an international company like Mattel or Gymshark, some of Shopify's biggest clients. It's really important that things are straightforward when you're starting out as a small business, and that's one of Shopify's biggest strengths. For example, you can shape your brand with beautiful, ready-to-go templates. Shopify also helps you start selling immediately with easy-to-run email and social media campaigns. Shopify also has an incredible support network. Its award-winning custom help is there 24/7 in case you get stuck. Shopify's AI tools are also perfectly tailored to help you out with things like product descriptions and branding. So, turn those dreams into... and give them the best shot at success with Shopify. Sign up for your £1 per month trial period at shopify.co.uk/spiked. That's shopify.co.uk/spiked. So the AfD, the Alternative for Germany party, has officially been classified as a right-wing extremist organisation by the BFV, which is the country's intelligence service. Tom, this is really, it's not a ban. The intelligence service doesn't have the power to actually act on this classification, but we are moving towards a further likely suppression of the AfD, which, let's not forget, is currently top of the polls in Germany, the most popular party.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's a really chilling escalation in that, as you say, it potentially kind of paves the way for a ban. I hope they're not stupid enough to indulge in that because of all the consequences for democracy that I'm sure we'll get into. But who knows? The level of sort of establishment hysteria and born of a genuine, political challenges to them knows no bounds at this point. There has been this appetite, not just in Germany, but across Europe, to kind of kill democracy in the name of saving it.
Yeah.
And I do fear that's what we could be looking at here. I think how you feel about the AfD and their particular brand of right-wing populism is sort of irrelevant at this point. It's a point of principle. If you've got, short of banning terrorist groups, if you've got a political party making political arguments, seeking election in free and fair elections, to ban them is an outrageous interference in democracy. And this is something which, again, it just doesn't seem to move the establishment in Germany or anywhere across Europe anymore. They seem to be completely tin-eared to the level of resentment that would be generated if they decided to go down this route. And even the level of, even what's happened already has generated a serious backlash. There's also a refusal to recognise what has put the AfD in the positions that it is at the moment, which is not because of the fact that it has a few unsavoury characters in it who engage in this, slogans which seem to reference old Nazi slogans. It's never entirely clear whether this is a troll or something more sinister. Either way, doesn't reflect particularly well on them. There have also been cases of people they've had to expel either at the high level or the low level because of saying some genuinely quite repugnant things. But that's not why they are the opposition party in Germany. That is not why they have had such sustained electoral success now. That's not why they've effectively become the party of the working class in Germany. It's because there are key issues which only they are willing to talk about, whether it's around immigration, whether it's around net zero. There is widespread distrust in the two main parties, which is a familiar theme across many polities at the moment. And they are going to these parties, often kind of looking past a lot of those more unpleasant elements within them to make their presence felt. I think that's absolutely clear now. It's kind of really summed up as well by the fact that, some individual, more sort of hardline AFD figures, people like Björn Höcke, for instance, who was actually criminalised for repeating these slogans which seem to allude to the Nazi era. They might be personally very unpopular, but at the same time they could still win an election in Thuringia, as they did last year, in which he was sort of leading the charge. He didn't win his seat, but they win the election. So it's an interesting indication of the fact that this isn't as simple as this is a sort of... it's not as simple as to say all the voters are flocking towards this party because of its most extreme elements. And also, it's something which, just on a democratic point of principle, is something that no one should go anywhere near. But it's almost like week by week, month by month, they're inching closer to that ban. And I just hope that they're not stupid enough to do it.
Definitely. I mean, it's interesting. People talk about populism as a result of sort of demagoguery, these figures like Farage and Trump being like these sort of pro-whisperers. The AFD are almost anti-demagogues. I mean, you have Höcke, as you say, really personally unpopular because of his sheer unpleasantness. Alice Weidel, the de facto leader, is really, really dull. She would not, she could not excite an auditorium of people. But it's really about, as you say, Tom, it's about the fact that AFD are talking about issues that the establishment has basically cordoned off and will not say anything about, pretty much, let alone, if you don't say anything about immigration, then someone with a hardline view will. So this isn't working to contain the public sentiment. Hopefully they don't go for a full ban, because that's just even more dangerous, as you've said. But Candice, have you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree. I think if they go for a full ban, it could even strengthen them. I mean, it's always so tempting. People are always so tempted to shut it down, and they think that that's it, that's the end of it. But it never is. And I think for a party like the AFD and their followers, they will absolutely use that. They will use that. And it will also increase resentment. I mean, people will start to think that actually the establishment is trying to stitch this up. I think that voters, like you say, have to make choices in an imperfect system. And I think that they can discern that there are lots of problems with the AFD. But on very real issues, the main political parties in Germany are silent. And they just assume their own rationality, even though their policies have proven to have incredibly low growth and been ruinous for the German economy. Net zero, for instance, which I think people are seriously questioning now. But I think that so many politicians in Germany and in other places as well follow it with religious zeal. So it will never prompt any self-reflection whatsoever.
It's, I suppose, a little bit difficult sometimes to grasp what's going on in another country. But net zero has been such a catastrophic failure in Germany. I mean, it really is the kind of case study in why you shouldn't embrace this extreme greenism. I mean, like, India's about to leapfrog it as the third, to become the third largest economy. And yes, that's because India is rising, but also it's because Germany has been going in completely the opposite direction. Yeah. And that has been so keenly felt now. So hopefully there's a lesson in that for people across Europe.
Definitely. And it is worth, reminding people that this is part of a broader worrying trend, particularly in Europe. We've had Marine Le Pen criminalised, and not only criminalised, fair enough, if she's done wrong, but also banned from standing for election unless her appeal is successful. We've had in Romania, the leading candidate who actually won the first round of the election, just removed, that election cancelled, and then having removed from the ballot. We, of course, had the lawfare against Donald Trump. Again, a mixture of legitimate and spurious cases combined with the obvious intent of preventing him from succeeding in a democratic election. So it's a very, very worrying trend, and it has to be fiercely resisted, and it has to be called out for what it is, as totally anti-democratic and unacceptable. So, since the Supreme Court ruling earlier this month, not everyone has been delighted at the law being clarified. Nicola Sturgeon, for instance, came out and said, well, she was keen not to say that the law was wrong or that the Supreme Court was wrong, but she's basically said the ECHR guidance is wrong and questionable, and the fact that men should not be in women's toilets would make trans lives unlivable.
I think some of the early indications would raise concerns in my mind that we are at risk of making the lives of trans people almost unlivable, and I don't think the majority of people in the country would want to see that. It certainly doesn't make a single woman any safer.
Candice, what do you make about that? Is it going to make people's lives unlivable that we can't have, say, male rapists in women's prisons anymore, or male, footballers on women's football teams?
Yeah, it shows the absolute level of narcissistic entitlement that I think characterizes this movement, and everybody has picked up on. It's just basic boundaries. No one's banning being trans. You can be trans if you want to, but there are things that you cannot do. You cannot go into women's spaces, and you can't suddenly declare that you are female based on a feeling. There is a biological reality, and I think that so many in law and in government just failed to observe those basic boundaries, so people had to push back, and this is the inevitable result. But I think that Nicola Sturgeon has never quite gotten over that she was so out of step, and that the position she took was such a sour end to her leadership. And I think she will die on this hill, and I think there are others who will die on this hill because they will never, ever, ever, ever be able to admit they were wrong about that.
And there's been all kinds of other places and companies saying they don't quite understand what the Supreme Court ruling means, even though it's obviously clear as day. There's a protest on the bank holiday at the Hampstead Ladies Pond. Actually, the protest was at the men's pond. A bunch of women pretending to be men in order to self-identify their way into it.
And interestingly, being stopped. And
being stopped, yeah. Well, because it turns out everyone does know what a man and a woman is. But it does seem that, although there has been a big victory, really the fight back has to continue, because it's not as if people on the trans side are not going to take this line down, basically.
No, absolutely. And it's a reminder of the fact that this was never strictly a legal question. Anyway, all the Supreme Court did was clarify the existing legal position. So as a consequence of that, it's clearly that the problem has been cultural, it's been institutional, it's been about organisations like Stonewall basically making up the law as they go along, dictating this to various companies and giving them their sort of rainbow kite mark thumbs up as a consequence. I mean, all of these things that so many people have been writing about and sort of railing against for so long is a reminder that this is a cultural, political issue that needs to be dislodged as much as anything else. I think Nicola Sturgeon doubling down is so interesting, not least because this is clearly the thing that, precipitated the collapse of her premiership. I mean, obviously, there was also the investigations that were lurking in the background and were threatening to become a big issue. She was starting to be a spent force on the question of independence, people not seeing her plan for getting to Scottish independence as credible. But at the same time, she really just self-immolated over that. And I thought it was fascinating on the level of the way in which even a politician and a party, which normally it's got its sole reason in politics is the constitutional question, will happily blow that up over whether or not Isla Bryson should be in a women's prison. It's fascinating, and then to continue to double down, I think, is also telling, because I think where the trans issue is concerned, you've got a lot of people who saw themselves as on the progressive side of politics, and whether they realise it or not, were called out. It was demonstrated that they were not they did not have the moral high ground, because their moral high ground meant letting rapists into women's prisons. And so for most of them, that means in response, you just get this outright rejection. My critics, as Nicola Sturgeon famously once said, aren't just transphobic, they're homophobic, misogynist, probably some of them racist as well. It's people who feel like the moral high ground is being pulled away from them, and therefore that it just makes them freak out in a way that you haven't really, that's deeply unedifying. I suppose what I'm saying is I wasn't expecting a kind of mea culpa from it, but to even just come out and make these comments rather than just kind of slink away into some sort of job in the international technocracy, as I'm sure she will eventually, I thought was interesting.
Definitely. And Candice, we've seen a similar backlash in the US to Trump's policies. There's been this strange sort of celebrity-fronted campaign with the slogan, "Protect the Dolls." People may have seen T-shirts with Pedro Pascal, where, flaunting that. Riley Gaines, the sportswoman who's famously, fought for women's sports, was being mobbed by Antifa this week. Seems the culture war is as strong as ever over there too.
Riley Gaines has become such a hate figure by so many in the trans activist movement in the US. And I think a lot of the hatred and the misogyny and the sexism that's directed at her reveals a lot about that movement, about some of the very deep-seated misogynistic ideas they have, sexist ideas they have. They like to position themselves, as Tom has just said, as some sort of like new civil rights movement, but they're not. They're not at all. There's nothing about it. And what what they try and do is they try and shrink women's rights and shrink women's voices. And, when someone like Riley Gaines, who just came out and made common sense arguments about men and women's sports, I mean, she becomes a witch that needs to be burned. But I don't think what they realize is how much they damage themselves in the course of public opinion. I mean, that's what happened here as well. I mean, all the polling showed that for years people were just quite relaxed about people being trans. They didn't bother anyone. And then the activists came along and they pushed really hard, and public opinion shifted and became a lot more hardline. So, I mean, the US movement is in a slightly different place to where the UK movement was. But if they carry on like this, you may see a same hardening of attitudes like you saw here.
You've got the supposedly #BeKind mob talking, walking around in black balaclavas, menacing women for daring to have an opinion. And then on the flip side, you've got the gender critical lot who have just been, they've been making a lot of serious arguments over the years and campaigning very hard as well. But they're just doing it, taking the piss, pointing out the absurdity, fake beards on, shouting no ghoulies in our poolies. And these were the people who have been accused of being the sinister American dark money funded Nazis in all of this. I just think it's so telling. The people in the black mask menacing women are on the side of progress, and the people taking the mick out of a ridiculous ideology are supposedly the sinister ones. It's crazy.
Thank you so much for watching the Spiked podcast. We'll be back at the same time next week. In the meantime, why not subscribe to Spike's YouTube channel and then click the bell so you're always alerted whenever there's some new content. Spiked is producing more videos than ever, from podcasts like this one to interviews to our series of polemics. You really, really don't want to miss out on it. Plus, to get your daily dose of Spiked, just go to spiked-online.com. That's our website at spiked-online.com.